o'clock. We do have a quorum present, and Jan is going to lead us in the pledge, and Kim is going to read the mission statement.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Texas pledge. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Jan.
TM's board mission statement. Tolosa Midway Independent School District educates every student to be a lifelong learner, a person of integrity, and a positive contributor to society.
Thank you, Kim. All right. No one has signed up for public comment, so we are going to go into our budget workshop. It's a PowerPoint presentation by Philip on the proposed 2022-2023 budget. Mr. Belmatri.
Mr. President, members of the board, what you are seeing tonight is an extensive amount of work that's gone into putting this deck together. Philip and his staff, in conjunction with Nueces County, have crunched numbers to get it to the position it's in. We're blessed as a property-rich district, almost $4 billion in property valuations. And I think the most exciting news tonight is that on Monday, our staff will see in excess of $2 million in salary increases. Wonderful. With a tax reduction of almost 2.5 cents. So I think that's really good news and really good work. So having said that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Philip Carroll.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I gave you a copy of the handout, and then I gave you 3 handouts that I'm going to be referring to. I gave you a copy. This is a notice that's going to go in the paper that we're required to publish 10 days before we have the public hearing. And I'll be referencing some of that data in the PowerPoint. And then I gave you this is the summary of the revenues and showing from our base budget what we're talking about, how the revenues are changing. And this third one, we're going to go over that. There's some new rules about new language that we have to use when we adopt the tax rate, and I'll get to that at the very end of the presentation. Revenues. Tax values. We got our certified tax values. Do you have everything, Mr. Senator?
No, I do not have that.
It's tucked behind. There it is.
Those are the 3. Yeah, those are the other 3 handouts. Yeah, and the PowerPoint. We got our certified values at the end of July. If you compare them to this point, our certified values that we got last July, our increase went up 4.23%. And one thing I didn't put in the slide, but one thing to keep in mind about them going up is, the state increased their homestead exemption from $25,000 to $40,000. So even with that additional exemption for all our homestead people in the district, our values still went up that much. So that's also an indication of how much they went up. They would have gone up even, the percentage would be even higher if they didn't have that extra exemption for the homestead people. And then if you look, our INS rates, we get a separate INS because we have the 1313 property, and that difference is the middle there, CC Polymers. They're currently, their value did not change because they haven't done any business there, but there was a newspaper article that said they're trying to get online, I think by 24. So that value will go up because that's a construction in progress value that hasn't changed in like 3 or 4 years. But that is the difference between our M&O and our INS values. Because remember, they only pay M&O taxes on $30 million, and then they have to pay INS taxes on their whole value, and that's the difference there. So if you look at the INS, it only went up 3.67%, so it's the bigger number. And then just to kind of compare though, the state, when they're calculating what our tax rate's going to be next year, they don't look at what our values were last July when they came out. They look at what the values are right now from last year. And you'll see the difference between that first number in the first column And the last number in the first column, you know, during the year, people get more exemptions during the year, people win protests, things change, and so our values actually, our taxable values actually go down because people get more exemptions and things. So they look at that number to compare what our new numbers are, and if you compare those, according to TEA, our values went up a little over 5%. And that's important because that's the number they're gonna use, because basically calculating the regular general fund tax rate, the M&O tax rate, it's kind of out of our hands. The state, they look at property values across the entire state, then they look at what your property values do, and they determine what your tax rate is. So if we go to the maximum compressed rate, that's what we call when, it's also called the Tier 1 tax rate. And as soon as I got my tax values, I had to report them to TEA. They look at how much they increase, they estimate how much values have gone up across the state. They verify the information, and then they come back and they tell you what your MCR is, how much you have to compress your rate if your values went up. And since our values went up, they're gonna compress our MCR rate. And if you remember, then on top of Tier 1 is what they call Tier 2, and that's what they call the golden and the copper pennies. Since we passed the TRE way back in 2010, we were up to the maximum 17 cents back then, but back a few years ago, House Bill 3, when they compressed, our 17 cents got compressed to 13.83 cents. So for 22-23, we're not changing that. If we wanted to go back up to the 17 cents, we'd have to have another election. But right now, we're not proposing that. So the Tier 2 rate will stay the same at almost 14 pennies. So then let's look at the tax rates. Let's see the first column, that's what our tax rates were the year that just ended. Our compressed Tier 1 rate was almost a little over 89 cents. We had our golden and copper pennies, got our M&O rate at $1.03. Our INS rate for our bond payments was right at a little over 15 cents, so we were at $1.18. This year we're proposing, based upon the increase that I submitted to TEA, they're compressing our Tier 1 tax rate down 2.44 pennies. So that 0.8921 is going down to 0.8677. That is totally based upon how much our values went up and also the ratio of how much values are going across the state. That is completely controlled by TEA and the appraisal districts across the state. And then just some graphs, just kind of showing you historically where our tax rates have been. We were at the maximum $1.17 back there in those middle years there, starting in 16, 17, and then you can see where compression from the state kicked in the 1920 year. We were compressed down to the 106, and then we were very even the last 2 years, because I don't know if you'll remember, last year our values actually dropped like 0.5 percentage rate. So we were flat there, but then we're compressed again this year because our values went back up. And then if you look at our INS rate, which that's totally dependent upon what our debt payments are. And if you go look back to the 10 years, that highest bar, that's back when we were at the peak of our borrowing the last of our $36 million bond. We were up to almost 30 cents, but because our values have gone up and our debt payments have maybe dropped a little bit, we've been able to compress that rate down to what we actually need. So, but for this year, we're proposing to keep the exact same rate that we had last year, right about 15 cents. And then you just look at this is the total tax rate. You can see where compression is working. Values are going up, which is not really helping the tax bill for people, but compression, the tax rates are going down. And then this is in the notice, it has to go into the paper, but I'll just show you this is what we have to publish in our notice. In the TM district, the average market value of the residence, the average taxable value, and then the proposed tax rate for the 2 years. So there's the taxes due on an average residence. So last year, the average resident, their tax bill would have increased to $124.40. This year, these values, the compression is actually lowering the tax bill. It would go down $37.50. So they take the average. And we have about 2,800 residents in our district. And I think it's not on, I don't think it's on the new, I don't know if it had the new, I think it just has the amount. Okay, the general fund revenue factors, these are all factors that go into estimating what our revenues next year. The first one is the PEA calculated tax rate, which is that MCR rate, plus we've got our 13, almost 14 cents that we approved, that our voters approved back in 2010. Then we actually get funded, we actually don't get funded based upon the values that we get from the appraisal district. We get funded on the certified values that the state, because the state's double checking all the appraisal districts in the state to make sure that they are properly appraising property, and so that the districts are kicking in their share of tax dollars towards meeting their per capita and making sure they're funding, and then the state kicks in the difference. So, but we won't know what the certified value for 22-23 is until next September. I'm waiting till next month to find out what the final certified values were for last year, so I can settle up and finally know exactly how much money we earned for the 21-22 year. So we're a year behind in that, but I have to estimate what I think our certified values are gonna be, and what I use a template from TASBO, and I just look at the relationship, because the number is never exactly the same. What the appraisal district, the Oasis County Appraisal District gives us, and what the state certifies, it's always a little bit different, but there is kind of a relationship to it. So I analyzed that to come up with hopefully a good estimate of what the certified values will be next September for this year. And then we've estimated, hopefully ADA is going to return to near pre-COVID levels. You know, we had some drop off because of COVID, but we're anticipating that we're going to get back almost to where we were before COVID. And then, of course, affecting cash flow is the estimated collection rate. Right now, we're at 90%. As I've said before, that's because of Flint Hills. They withhold, they protest that huge amount on there. And like I said before, it doesn't really hurt us as much, because now that they're using current certified values, whatever Flint Hills doesn't, even though our collection rate might only be 90%, if we wind up collecting if it somehow came up we were getting 93%, then we'd get more tax money and the state would reduce their money. But if we only collected 88%, the state's gonna kick in the difference. The bottom line would not change. So it's not really affecting it as much now that Flint Hills withholds protest such a huge amount of their values, because the state will make up for it. And if they do pay us, we just get less money from the state. But the bottom line doesn't change. It doesn't severely affect us like it used to when they had a year lag in certified values. And then just looking at local revenues, and this is summarized on the sheet that's got the lines. So with these, with all those factors, based upon the base budget from last year, because our values went up a little bit, even though our tax rate went down, our values went up a little bit. We're going to have a little bit over $500,000 increase in property taxes. And then I guess because of the recession or inflation or whatever, interest rates are going back up. So I'm increasing investment earnings for the general fund for next year. And if you look at state revenues, here's where going back to, if we get our ADA back up to close to what it was before COVID, our state funding, which is the Foundation School Fund and the Available School Fund, be almost $900,000 more than last year. TRS is going to go up a little bit because that's affected on our payroll, but that's not a true expense because there's an offsetting, a true revenue because there's an offsetting expense. That's just an accounting number. And then one thing, it's not a revenue, but it is tied to the state funding our recapture. It's going to go up about $54,000 to a little over $500,000 from last year. And then for federal revenues in the general fund, our OTC revenue is going to go up a little bit. Our MaxSHAR revenue, which is what we get that's the Medicare, the services that we provide, I'm increasing that $100,000. And then we do have, we're taking indirect cost on the ESSER 3 funds, and so we get the general fund gets to get some indirect revenue from that, and so that's estimated to be about $400,000. That revenue, though, that's only going to be around as long as we have ESSER. Once we spend the ESSER money, we won't be getting that anymore. So that's all the categories for general fund revenue. Then the debt service revenue, just an overview. Total outstanding debt at the end of this fiscal year, a little over $43 million. Our scheduled principal and interest payments for next year, about $5.4 million. That includes some $241,000 that were scheduled, and you'll see that Monday night. We're going to ask y'all to approve what they call a defeasance resolution, which means we want to keep our INS rate where it is so we can pay off some of our debt earlier. So that's why we're recommending that the INS rate remain unchanged and stay at 15.1504. And the estimated fund balance at the end of August 31st, and that should say 2023, is going to be a little bit over $1 million. And same thing, estimated collection rate of 90%. So we are allowed, the county does allow us, since we have a history of our collection rate only being 90%, we're able to set a tax rate to ensure that we will collect enough to take care of the 10% that we're not collecting. So we can pay, so we can make our debt payments. The new tax rate adoption regulations. You know, there's three tax rates that we have to calculate. There's the MCR and the local option tax rates. That's the one we talked about. TA has to tell us what it is. We've got our 13, almost 14 cents that our voters approved back in 2010. Then there's other calculations like Mr. Van Metre mentioned. I work with the county tax assessor collector. They take all our data and they help us fill out the worksheets from the state comptroller that we have to fill out to prove that we are not setting a rate that is higher than what the voters have approved. Now, there's all kind of special rules because the way Texas school districts get funded, we're different from cities and counties and other municipal or other taxing entities. So there's a voter approval tax rate that we have to calculate using the comptroller's worksheets, and the county helps me crunch those numbers. Because the only way our voter approval tax rate would be higher than what we're adopting is, since we're asking y'all to do that defeasance on Monday night, we can keep our INS rate at the 15 cents. So we're still legal. We're going to adopt a rate that is not higher than what the voters have approved. The new one that's kicked in this year is called the no new revenue tax rate. And if you want to, the one handout that I gave you that's got some verbiage on here, it's like this. This is the legislature. It's part of their truth in taxation, but what they basically want, every taxing entity has to do this. So it doesn't take into consideration any of the things that affect our tax rate adoption from TEA. So currently, it's only going to affect the INS tax rate because our other rate is set by the state and we're protected by that. But because like I said before, we'd have to have an election to increase our tier 2 tax rate. But we can set a higher INS rate with the defeasance, which we're going to do Monday night. That's for the voter approval tax rate, and we're okay with that. We're within the legal limits of that. The new one is this no new revenue tax rate. It's a uniform calculation for all Texas taxing entities, water districts, counties, cities, whoever can assess taxes. You basically have to take your total levy. Like I said, it doesn't take into account the rules about how Texas school districts get funded and how state revenue is tied in with taxing revenue. And it doesn't take into account what you actually collect. This calculation means you take your total levy, what you're going to get, and you compare it to the year before. And if your values have gone up, then for you to have the same amount of revenue, your levy has to go down. So if those things don't correspond, according to this calculation, we're going to adopt a tax rate that exceeds the no new revenue tax rate. That's because TA has its own rules about how we can set our tax rate. So so this year, the adopted tax rate that we're going to adopt on the 29th, it is by the definition that the state has determined, we are going to get more revenue than we got before, which is their way of saying you are basically, they're not saying you're raising your tax rate, but you're getting more money than you got before. So that's why they want you to say this specific language when we adopt the tax rate. It's just a way of saying, hey, you're still getting more money than what you got the year before at the tax rate you're going. Now with school districts, if we did only adopt the rate that the no new revenue tax rate did, if we did adopt that, we would lose millions of dollars in state funding because TEA also, they want you to tax at the maximum that you can tax so you can kick in your share and they will match the difference. If we did not adopt what TEA says we could adopt, we will lose millions of dollars of funding. So, but I think it's part of the truth in taxation. They want to be transparent. They want to say, you have to use this language that says you are going to get more money than you did last year. So that's why we have to, and you'll see it on the 29th, that the motion, when we adopt the tax rate, we have to use this wording that says it comes up with this number. And like I said, it doesn't take into account that we're only gonna be able to collect 90% of what we tax. They're assuming that we're gonna get 100% of what we tax. So it's one of those, it's how you look at the numbers, and it's an apple to an orange, but this is the language that we're required to use when we adopt our tax rate. And I think that is it. Does anybody have any questions or anything about revenues or the no new revenue tax rate?
So I had a question. Since the state comes in and recaptures or takes away $500,000 of our money, why do we want to keep our taxes high? Why can't we lower our taxes so they don't have to take so much? Why can't we get a closer number? Maybe they only take $200,000 instead, taking all of our citizens' money and give it to somebody else in the state.
But if we lowered our tax rate, we would lose even more state revenue than what the recapture is. Because we're not kicking in what the state considers our maximum tax dollars to help offset what the state has to contribute.
It's all part of
I mean,
their
that's-
formula.
Yeah, it's,
So they want you to take as much as they make from your citizens here and then send it to some other school district.
true, but they are still doing their thing where they're trying to compress the rates so that the taxing dollars are less, and then the state's gonna have to kick in more. To maintain the level of funding the schools, they're gonna have to kick in a bigger share as they reduce the tax share, as they force us to keep compressing our tax rate. So, I can't tell you that I understand all the complexities of why it works that way, but.
Well, I can shed some light on that. Coming from a district that did not have the tax valuations to reach the basic allotment of a little over $6,000 per kid, without excessive state aid, we wouldn't have raised nearly the money to have an equitable education for the kids. Now, it does leave a bad taste in your mouth. For example, what we found out today with our CTE program. Well, we're exploding opportunities for CTE, and we were anticipating our foundation funding in CTE to really rise, but what we found out was, tell them.
Well, since we're benefiting in a big way from 3 years ago when House Bill 3 came out and they redid the formula, and that's when we gave the big raises to the teachers. Remember, we had to give the teachers so much, and we had to give the teachers with more experience more. There was a hold harmless in there, and they call it the transition allotment. And so we get they had to give that to us because otherwise House Bill 3 would have resulted in us losing like $4 million in revenue. So we have this transition allotment. Well, because we get the transition allotment, even if our CTE numbers go up, our bottom line doesn't change. Now, the pie stays the same, but that just means a bigger slice of the pie belongs to career and tech. So if I give career and tech more money, that means I got to take away money from somebody else. So that was a sobering realization this week, but
And where we benefit from having almost $4 billion is on the INS side.
Right.
Where we can call a $98.5 million bond election, and in essence, the net gain is a little over a penny when you factor in the M&O reduction, where other districts that don't have that luxury of valuations just can't keep up with the facilities like we can.
Well, like you mentioned, we have about 2,800 people in our,
There are homesteads.
Homesteads.
There's 2,000,
homestead.
there's about 2,800 tax accounts that get the homestead
homestead
exemption.
exemptions?
Yes, that the
there's-
state, we give a local homestead exemption. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember exactly how much it is. And then the state was 25 and they increased it to 40. So we have the state one at 40 and then we have a local one too. We have about 2,800 accounts as of July, the certified in July. And it grew, I will tell you, I think it grew by about 100 from the year before. We were like 2,700 the year before.
There's a lot more homes
Homesteads.
growing up.
So
Even
there's,
last year.
Yep.
there's 100, they're building houses, we know where that's coming from. I will just give you a preview. Monday night, it's gonna be another budget workshop, but I'm gonna glaze over the revenue real quick, but that's gonna be focused on the expenditures and how I can show you the dollars on the raises and the expenditure side of it, and that'll pretty much be a preview. I'm hoping that'll be like 99.9% ready to go, chance for y'all to look at it, see everything, and then 2 weeks later on the 29th is when we'll have the public hearing, and we will adopt the budget and set the tax rate. And it should look it's gonna hopefully be identical. But you'll have all the information on the 15th, and then we'll be ready on the 29th.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. That was good information. New things as well. Now we go to the discussion action items. Discuss and consider approval of order and notice of election for the Los Midway ISD Board of Trustees to be held on November the 8th, 2023.
Mr. President, members of the board,
22, I'm sitting there thinking. 22.
this is an amended order, primarily because one of the seats that will be elected in November is for a 2-year term to fill out, who's? Mr. Lundin. And which one is that?
James.
James. So in the original order, it had all of them being 4-year terms. But one of them will be 2. So to satisfy the election requirements, we need to bring the amended order back to you and have you vote on this. And that is the only change, correct?
That, and when speaking with Mr. Cruz's office, the orders now need to be both in English and in Spanish. So we meet that requirement as well.
Is that going forward?
Question?
Okay. That's your,
It is the administration's recommendation that the board approve the amended election order as presented.
thank you, Mr. Badmantry. Do we have a motion on administrative recommendation, please?
I make that
Kim
motion.
does, and John seconds. Any comments, questions? It's a good thing we had someone to clarify that. That's
Yes.
good, because we wouldn't want to be in trouble with something
No,
else.
I don't like being in trouble.
None of us do. All right, there's a motion second, no questions. All those in favor? Those opposed, motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much. Now we go into the very exciting portion of our meeting. It's
Philip, that was a really good job.